The Things We All Carry is a podcast about first responders and their stories surrounding trauma on the job. The intention of this podcast is to raise awareness and share meaningful conversation around a subject often viewed as taboo or simply ignored. Be aware this content may be graphic and it is real. It may not be suitable for children or adults triggered by this subject matter.
Welcome back to The Things We All Carry. And today I'll apologize for those of you who might appreciate watching the video. There's no video today. This was a conversation I recorded. I don't know, it was a while back. Let's just put it that way. I'm not sure exactly how long ago. It was a few months. It was before I decided to record video for all of my podcasts. But the gentleman who was on the show today had voiced, he showed up at my quote unquote retirement party, which kind of surprised me. It was kind of an honor to have him there because I totally didn't expect him to be there. And his reply was, of course, I wouldn't miss it. And to me, that's just the kind of person he is. And I'll get more into that as I get into his introduction. But he specifically wanted, his lucky number is 13. And he said, well, since episode 13 is gone, I want episode 131 or 130, but 131 made more sense for some reason. Anyway, so he is episode 131. And it was just, we'll go back. I mean, I don't have video, so it's just two old guys recording old school style, I suppose. We sat down, had a couple microphones in front of us, and we were face to face, and we talked. We talked about his life. And it's kind of nice to do it that way. One of the things that Bruce reminds me when we have conversations is that it's still possible to have very civilized discourse with somebody, even if you don't 100% agree with everything they say, or they don't 100% agree with everything you say. And he's one of those guys. He's one of those guys that reminds me why, or of what was kind of wrong or missing in government and politics today, is this ability to listen. The word moderate is kind of it's not just fallen out of favor, but it's almost like a endangered species in this country, because you have radicals on both sides of this aisle, and you have very little meeting in the middle where the true moderates used to be. And that's the art of being a statesman. Man or woman, that's the art of being a statesman. The problem now is that doesn't sell. That doesn't buy them anything. And because of the way the system is set up, they have to sell. They have to bring the money in. And so they have to be more radical and voice more radical opinions to bring in the money from the fringes, basically. Where in true reality, if you look at the majority of people in the country, we're a lot closer in thought than we ever like to admit or even realize. They're key subjects that kind of drive us apart. But even if we talk about those key subjects, we find middle ground on those key subjects. And a conversation with someone like Bruce, who's my guest today, is like that. He has ideas, I have ideas, and they don't always mesh up, but he's open to that conversation, and he's open to saying, so why do you feel that? And once you express yourself, and he does give you that time to express yourself, you sit back, you listen to what he thinks. And then nobody's trying to necessarily change anybody's mind on the spot, but it's one of those conversations where you walk away thinking about it, and you continue to think about it. And sometimes you go, yeah, I can see what he's saying there. I need to moderate this, or I need to do this, or no, he's wrong. And I think he needs to come around and hopefully he heard what I said. That's a missing piece in this world today. Friends have difficult times doing it, let alone rivals, or I don't want to use the word enemies, but that's the way we treat people, as enemies. If you don't think how I think, then we can't be friends, or we can't have conversation, or we can't agree on anything. And that's complete bullshit. We have to agree on stuff, or this country falls farther into disarray, and we're already in disarray. I had one of the parts of the conversation that you'll hear today is we talk about, at one point, asking people why the fire service is having trouble filling spaces or getting applicants. And so I pose that question, as you hear, to some listeners and followers, or actually former guests as well, who came on and gave me some answers. And it was, listen, has the fire service lost its luster? Is this a job that people don't want to do anymore? And yeah, I got various answers. And mostly what it was, no, the fire service is what it is, but society has changed so much that maybe it's not a life of service people are looking for. And where people are coming from now doesn't fit the mold for a fire department career or a career based in service. And so then the natural question is, well, what do you do? How do you fix it? Because if you don't fix it, the candidate and applicant pool is only going to get shallower. We're going to lose that depth, not only of quantity, but you're going to lose severe quality, and we're already seeing it. So what changes can we make to bring in numbers and quality? And that's an interesting question. And I'm not sure what the answer is to that. I espouse the thought that you raise a bar, and you raise the bar and you make it harder for someone to get through your recruit school. You make it a point of pride to say, I did that. I succeeded where nobody else was succeeding, or few succeeded. But those of us who got through, we've earned it, and I don't want to lose this position. And I think we're afraid to do that. We're afraid to do that in a lot of cases in this country and in this world. That hard work kind of scares people away. It's easier to dumb it down than it is to challenge people to rise to the occasion. And we need to rise to the occasion. We need to rise to the occasion as humans, as citizens, as, mothers, fathers, whatever it is. We need to rise to the occasion, not dumb it down for people but bring people up and include, but also I don't know if it teaches the word. I'm not looking for that word. I don't know what I'm looking for there. But we need to make sure that we're not discarding people along the way, but that we're giving them the tools to improve their lives, improve themselves, and then thrive in the future. And thriving is an interesting subject because not everybody thrives. I sat driving the other day and I looked around me and God, people just look so down and dejected and out of it. They're lost contact with anything joyful. And it makes sense. I mean, you're getting up at ass crack of dawn early and you're driving however far you drive to work, and you're sitting and you're doing your job and you're packing it up, and maybe you're getting home before dark. I mean, summertime you are, but as the days get shorter, you're not going to. And that's your life. You do that 5 days a week. And that doesn't bring the chance to thrive, in my opinion. But I will tell you this, and I saw this thing. I saw a meme, and it said, what is poison? Anything beyond what we need can be poison. So anything beyond what we need can be poison. What does that mean? I think that it goes back to too much of a good thing is a bad thing. And I get some of that. I can fully understand that because I have nothing but freedom to do what I want right now because of where I am, how I stepped away from the fire service. But that's a poison on the other hand, because I've got all kinds of time and no direction. And so it's on me, but that no direction is a poison for me. That time is a poison for me. And I have to find my antidote. I have to find the way to defeat that and keep myself driving forward on goals that I have for the show in my life. So I'm pushing forward. I've got plans. I keep telling you about the plans. I'm doing some writing. I'm searching out these interviews. I'm planning another route for this show or for this endeavor called podcasting. I'm so happy you guys tune in every week. I'm so happy that you spend some time with me and you give me some feedback and you let me know what you think about this show and you think about me. I don't care if it's good or bad, man. Just tell me what you think. I'm telling you, I need to hear it. It helps. It helps me as a person, helps me as a host, and it helps the show. Welcome to episode 131 of The Things We All Carry. This week's guest is a friend and a former kind of boss of mine. He's a battalion chief from my department that I worked for. And he and I have had discussions in the past, and I know where he stands on a lot of issues. And he's an interesting person. He is, I don't think he would deny it. He's opinionated and bullheaded, and but he's also a leader, and I respect that. We need more leaders in this business. Less bosses, more leaders. Bruce joined the fire department, I'm not even going to, years ago, 30 plus, as a volunteer. He joined the fire department 30 plus years ago as a volunteer, worked his way into the career system, and is now a battalion chief in his department. But he's one of those chiefs that he doesn't pull punches. He's brusque, and he'll tell you what he thinks, but it's okay, because he'll also tell you what he expects of you, and he'll hold you to it. And that's leadership. Bruce pulled me aside one day and he said, I want to come on the show. He said, I have a story to tell that most people aren't going to know. And that's kind of the case with everybody. We all have a story to tell that people don't know. And he said, I'm very worried about it because it's going to expose some dark secrets of mine that first of all, nobody knew until just recently. He hadn't even told his wife until, I don't know, short time before he and I spoke. And he had to tell his adult children about it. And it's not an easy thing to talk about. Bruce's early life was peppered with abuse. And that's what the conversation is today. We talk about those formative years, how he, as a child, reacted to very adult things happening to him, where he took it as he grew, and how he came back together as a human, and his emancipation at the age of 16, because as most 16-year-olds, we all know what we're talking about and we can do better. He left the house at 16 and he was on his own after that. And then he finds his way to the volunteer service in his community, which then leads him to a career fire service, which 30 years later, here he is as a battalion chief, and he's looking, a couple years down the road towards retirement. This is part one of my conversation with Bruce. Like I said, this is the early years leading into getting into the fire service and just getting hired into the fire service. Next week will be part two, and we'll get from, getting hired all the way up to the present day. You guys sit back, take a listen, as I always say, and let me know what you think. Give me the feedback, and your suggestions, your comments, everything affect how I do this show. So I'd love to hear from you. Reach out to me on Instagram. If you want to text me, reach out to me. I'll get you my number. We can text back and forth about it. If you want to just talk, let me know. We can just talk at some point. Once you listen to the show, please share it with others. Let them know what the show is about. Let them know what we're doing here. And let's spread this message far and wide. All right, you guys get out there and do something for yourself. We just start and have a conversation. Let's do it. All right. Welcome back to the Things We All Carry. Today is a rare thing for me, and I'm happy to say it that I'm in person. I'm sitting down with Bruce in his home, and thanks for having me, first of all. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. And you'll be the only person that I ever let wear a Boston cap in my house.
Well, I'll wear it proudly then, because I don't think I own another one, except for maybe a Celtics, but it's still Boston. So you have had a long career already, and we'll get into that a little bit, but would you join 1996?
96, huh?
And that was 96 was the career, or was that the volunteer side in 96 when you?
That was career. That's when I got hired.
Okay. So volunteer started even earlier than that. It was 92.
91, 92.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you do the math. I don't know where you're at, because I'm semi-retired and math isn't my strong suit, but you're 30 years.
I'm 2.5 years away from retirement.
Right. So that's all that's important, is 2.5 years away from retirement. Well, let's get the first question out of the way. What's the last song you heard?
Tragic Truth.
By?
Five Finger Death Punch.
Okay. Well, that's, I'm not familiar with that song, so I had to listen to it. So I will add it. I've started doing the Things We All Carry. It's called the Songs We All Carry playlist on Spotify. So I'm trying to add the songs as I get the suggestions from guests and from followers.
And if my playlist wasn't so extensive, it's hard to say what the last song I heard, but
right.
It just so happens this morning I had Five Finger Death Punch.
Perfect. Did you work last night?
I did.
Yeah. So a good way to stay awake is listening to Five Finger Death Punch on the way home. Was it a busy night? I mean, you're a battalion chief, so you run once in a while at night.
We didn't do anything last night.
Well,
rested.
Yeah. So 30 years, roughly 2.5 years from retirement. How did you get there? Where did you start? Where did you grow up? What was family life like? And I know that it's layered, that story for you. So where do you want to start with that? You want to start with where you grew up?
Yeah, let's start from the beginning, right? We'll work our way all the way through the end and talk a little bit about what I see the future being.
All right. Well, without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Bruce.
All right. So born 1972, a little town in Maine known as Brunswick. Grew up most of my childhood in Brunswick. Right around the age of 12, we moved to Texas for a year, and then we wound up moving here. I moved out at the age of 16 and been here ever since. Going back into that childhood thing, my parents actually divorced when I was 2. Really didn't know my father that well until later in life. When I finally got to meet him, unfortunately, he passed away just a few years after we had really started to develop a good relationship. In the meantime, both of my parents remarried a couple times, to include to my half-brother and sister's father. We spent some time living with my mother, the 3 of us, after they had divorced. And then financially, there was a struggle. Single mom back in the 70s, early 80s, just trying to make her way, made a decision to join the military. So she went into the reserves. And then while she was in boot camp, we went to live with my stepfather at the time, my brother and sister's father, and his new wife. The unfortunate thing with that was that it was an abusive environment, extremely abusive, both physically and mentally. Physical included beatings for things such as you didn't swallow right. There was sexual abuse that occurred, and it got to a point where, as a child, I was old enough to understand, but not old enough to truly understand what I was doing. And quite honestly, if this had come out of my polygraph, probably never would have been hired by the fire department, because what finally got me out of there was that one day after a sexual assault, I had taken my brother and sister outside and gotten a gas can, poured the gas on the side of the house, and was just getting ready to light it when my stepfather pulled in.
And how old were you when you did that?
I was roughly 10, 11, somewhere in there.
And I have to imagine that you just saw that as the only way out.
It is absolutely the way that I remember it. And the crazy thing is that for, I want to say, the better part of 20 plus years, I'd completely blocked that memory out of my mind. It wasn't until we were sitting in my mom's house one night, I was sitting on the floor in front of the couch, and she was having this conversation with me about my brother, and my brother kind of blamed me for leaving them there, because when I did that, they sent me to a boys and girls home, and then a week later I went back with my mom. My brother and sister stayed there. Really the way it played out was because of my bad behavior, they sent me somewhere else. It wasn't their bad behavior that was being held accountable.
Right.
So anyway, my brother, he obviously knows differently now, and we've talked about it several times before, but he really kind of blamed me for a long time for leaving he and my sister there. Like it was my fault. And my mother said, "You don't want to know what he did." And I looked at her and with bewilderment, like, what did I do? And she told me what I did, and it all came flashing back. I remembered instantly. Like I said, if I'd remembered that during my polygraph, I probably never would have been hired.
Yeah, right.
Right? Like, wait, you're an arsonist? Or at least attempted. And yes, situation certainly dictated what I had done at that point. It wasn't, I guess that's where I get the I knew what I was doing, but I didn't know what I was doing.
Yeah, I was going to say, you mentioned all the abuse that's going on, and you mentioned that this happens after an instance of sexual abuse. Were all three of you being abused, or were you targeted, or what was going on there?
No, all three were abused. When I mentioned the not drinking right, is that was a situation where my stepmother's family, the entire family, could take a drink and just swallow it straight out of a glass, whereas they basically had no gag reflex. So my brother and my sister and I, we can't do that. We have to get fluid into our mouth and then swallow. And they didn't think he was drinking right because he wouldn't swallow it straight down. He wouldn't just pour it down the gullet. And so they took a section of 2x4 and they were literally beating his ass with it for, I don't even remember how long. But, that was just one instance of things that they did, and they did it to all three of us. As far as the sexual abuse goes, I can never say. I honestly don't know. There were times where we were locked in our rooms. We were told to go to our rooms and stay there, and God only knows what was happening with everyone else while we were there. So,
and what age were you again when you went to your stepdad's? And when your mom joined the military, and who makes that decision that you go there?
So the way that all came about was that her second husband, my brother and sister's father, had adopted me. So I went from Bruce Merritt White to Bruce Merritt Soper. And now I'm Tucker, right?
Right.
I get around. So because he had legal custody, he was legally responsible for all three of us, is that it was just a simple, they're going to stay with you.
So it wasn't a matter of a judge saying, all right, well, if you're going away to the military, then I'm going to decide where your child goes. It was already a decision that had been made because of the marriage.
Yes and no. So there was a legal decision that had to be rendered anytime custody changes from one person to another, because schools won't register kids if you don't have custody of them. So the custody actually changed legally, with the agreement that when she got done, we would just go back, and that didn't happen.
And I'm going to make assumptions, and you tell me if I'm right or wrong. Did she come back and say, okay, I'm back? It did come back to me, and he just said no?
Basically.
And so then she had to go into a protracted court battle, or what?
It was a very long court battle, because I want to say it was at least 2 years before my brother and sister finally came back. And it was a constant going to court, coming home, going to court.
What are you the oldest?
I am.
How much younger are your brother and sister?
On my mother's side, my brother is 5 years younger than I am. My sister's 7 years younger than I am.
Okay.
So I was about 7 or 8 when we went there.
So at 10, they're looking at you as kind of a mini parent, because they're 5 and 7 years younger than you. And so, yeah, I can see where they would go, why did you leave us?
Yeah.
Because in some sense, you probably were at least a buffer, if not protection, for them in those situations at times.
Yeah. And I mean, I've often thought about that throughout the years, right? Is when I left, how much more abuse did they wind up taking because I wasn't there to take any of it?
Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah.
That and the fact that now he's angry. Or maybe.
Well, who?
Your stepfather.
I honestly, that man changed when he married our stepmother. He changed. He wasn't. Prior to that, the worst that he had ever done was my brother and I were acting up one day, and we were running through the house, and my mother was like, "Stop it, stop it, stop it." We didn't stop, and she basically looked at him and said, "You're going to do something about this." And he came out of the kitchen with a wooden spoon, and he literally dropped it on my butt, right? Like he just tapped me with it. That was the worst he had ever done.
Right.
And then when he met her, he changed completely. It was shocking to see how much influence a person could have over another person when it came to, I don't even know the word I'm looking for. I guess, manipulating the way they are,
Right.
and who they are. And then you think about it and you're like, okay, well, could somebody really manipulate somebody that much? Or was that person the whole time? They just didn't have the avenue to bring it out.
Yeah. And it's the chicken and egg question, right? It just happens that this lands in a very perverse court of abuse.
Yeah.
And to say which comes first, was it the new wife that made the behavior? Who knows? It doesn't fucking matter.
Right.
Right. I mean, you guys experienced this abuse no matter what. It doesn't matter the reason why. No 10-year-old, 5-year-old, 3-year-old deserves any abuse, let alone whatever else happened. So it doesn't matter the why, I suppose. It's just interesting trying to figure out the logistics behind how you end up there and how and what happens after you leave. Hey guys, quick break right here just to check in and thank each of you for listening to the show. Your support has been paramount, and I appreciate all of you. I have one request, though. I need you to share the show with everyone you know. Help me get the word out and spread these stories as far and as wide as we can. While you're at it, please leave a review of the show wherever you happen to listen. Feel free to reach out to me at any time to share your story, to talk, or to pass on suggestions. Let's get on with the rest of the show. So you get out after this attempted arson,
Mm-hmm.
and you go to a juvenile system, and then your mom gets custody of you after that.
Yep.
And it takes another 2 years to get your brother and sister back.
Yeah, roughly.
Are you seeing them in the meantime?
Occasionally. There was some visitation that was worked out through the courts, but even that was hit or miss, right? The real problem is that they were both sheriffs. So
they had an in.
I hesitate with that just because, I know not every cop is a bad cop.
Right.
But in this case, these two were able to manipulate a system to their benefit.
I'm going to go out on a limb and say that they were probably bad cops with what they were doing at home.
And here's the thing. I really can't speak to that, right? Like, I don't know how they were as police officers or as sheriff's deputies.
Right.
I just know how they were at home. And quite honestly, that exists everywhere in everything, right? Is that you never suspect the people of being bad people. You never really suspect your neighbor of being a bad person.
No.
Until all of a sudden the 5 o'clock news is sitting out in front of your house asking you about them.
Yeah. Well, he seems like such a nice guy.
He's always been a nice guy, right?
Yeah.
Like anytime I needed a cup of sugar, he gave it to me.
It's very rarely, I knew that guy was an asshole.
Absolutely.
So
that's very true.
All right. So, you and I sat down, was it about a month ago, correct?
Yeah.
And we kind of covered some of this and yeah, there was some serious shit going on, and I don't necessarily need to delve into it, but there was some stuff there that you carry with you to today because you of course you do, to carry it with you, basically. Yeah. And in some cases, these, like the arson stuff, doesn't come back to you until certain situations, and then it kind of rises up, and you remember this and you remember that. Was that going on through like the entirety of your life, through as a young kid to teenager to young adult to where you are now? Was it always something coming up that you go, oh, there's another thing?
Yeah. More so, I think when I was younger, like a lot of the things came back. And I guess they refer to it as like a traumatic block, right? Like you experience this traumatic event and your mind just kind of puts it out to the side and holds it there for later. The whole way that the subject of my biological father came up was that I went to my mother one day and I asked her, I said, do I have another father? And I was like 7 years old.
Yeah. Cause you thought your stepfather was your dad.
Right.
Right.
Like that's all I ever knew. Right. Consciously, that's all I ever knew. But I had these mental pictures from when I was 2. The first one was 4 people sitting on a couch or couches in our apartment in Portland, Maine. The next one was those 4 people holding me up and a bucket of mop water got spilled. The next one was 2 cars racing off in opposite directions. And the next one was a woman that was walking down the hallway of the apartment building carrying a mop. And I could recall what she was wearing. It was It was almost like a robe with green. It was green and black. I remember it to this day. And so when I asked my mother, do I have another father? She said, what would make you say that? And I told her about these pictures, and she instantly started to cry, because that day was my father, his new girlfriend, my mom, and her new boyfriend. My dad was there to pick me up. He hadn't paid child support. My mom wasn't going to let him take me. There was a fight that ensued with me in the middle at the door, mop bucket not knocked over. He had a silver car. Her boyfriend had a red car. They passed each other in the street right out in front of the house. The woman walking down the hallway was my grandmother. She lived in the apartment in front of us, and she was bringing a mop down, and she wore that robe all the time. So I had those mental pictures, and I, for whatever reason, at 7 years old, I figured something had to be different.
It's, I'm trying to think, when we had that conversation, I started going, all right, well, what's my earliest memory? And I have no idea. I wouldn't be able to tell you what my earliest memory is. I certainly wouldn't have been able to recall something that happened at 2, And so it's definitely something that for you was so significant and dramatic that it just stuck there.
And I think the only reason I remember, or I even know the age, right, is those markers of where did my parents get divorced? I was 2. So I was right around 2 when I had those memories. So if it weren't for those markers, I'd just have these visions, and I'd probably have to ask somebody like, hey, do you remember living in this place or something like that? And they'd have to tell me, but because those markers are there that kind of mark time for me.
So at what age, so you're about, I'm going to guess, wait a second. You said 10? No, you said 12-ish when the arson happened.
So
when the attempted arson.
Yeah. So my sister was an infant when we went there. So I was about 7. It was about 2.5 years, 3 years, somewhere in there. So I was about 10.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then another 2.5 years. So your brother and your sister come back to you guys at 12 to 13 years old.
Right.
How's that transition then? How does that go?
I think it was difficult, to say the least, right? Because here are a couple of kids who, obviously suffered for longer, right? And they figured out that they can be loved in a different way. And then they hungered for that love. And then you got a kid that's been there for 2.5 years who's been the only one. And now he's got to share that. So it was difficult. It was certainly difficult. I don't think it really helped the fact that my mom had a new boyfriend at the time. I won't say new, they had been dating for a couple of years. And eventually she wound up marrying him, and they were married for 30 plus years. So that transition was difficult because there were a lot of different components to it. It wasn't just them coming back to live with us after a couple months, right? This was a couple of years. So you're dealing with all the trauma that they've been through and this new life for them. A kid that had been through some of that trauma, had been out of that trauma for a while, and now had to basically revert back to, or take a step back. And this new guy in this relationship who, to his credit, he did what he could for us over the years, and I respect him. They have separated recently, so not going to get into a whole lot about him. I'll give him credit for what he tried to do for us. So
you come back to your mom's place, and do you explain to her at the time, hey, this is why I did what I did?
Oh, yeah.
As a 10-year-old, you try to get that point across to her. You try to tell her of the abuse, whether it's emotional, physical, sexual, whatever the abuse, because you experienced all 3. And so how do you get that point across to her that this is what happened?
I don't doubt that she ever knew, and she tried to use that. But you remember what I told you they did. And so the system was always going to be in their favor, because the one thing she lacked was proof.
Right.
She had the word of a 10-year-old kid, which in the 80s didn't hold a lot of weight.
Not just a 10-year-old kid, a 10-year-old kid who was caught with kerosene spreading it around his house.
That's fair.
Right. And I'm not, no, not being an asshole, but to look at it from the standpoint of an authority, they go, what, this kid's not to be trusted. He tried to burn his house down.
No, and I'm agreeing with you. I wasn't trying to be accusatory. It was like, it's a fair statement, right? It's like, would you trust a 10-year-old who just tried to burn your house down with you in it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think some of us would go, well, why the fuck was he trying to burn it down with you in it?
I think today we would probably ask that question.
It's easy to put a lens on it.
Even today, people would ask that question, but there's still that element of distrust in children. And not only that, but I guess the distrust of the system, right? Is like, who do you believe? When do you believe them? How do you believe?
It's a very delicate balance. And there are still people, like you said, your stepdad and his wife were in law enforcement. And so now they're looked at as, well, they're pillars of the society.
Yeah.
Pillars of the society. So yeah, of course the court system is going to go, wait a second, they wouldn't do that because we've entrusted them with the safety of our community. Right. So yeah, that's a hell of a battle.
The court system then too also looked at the fact that there was two of them. There was only my mother.
Right.
Right. There's two steady incomes. There's one somewhat steady income. Right. So there were a lot of factors that went into it, and I don't necessarily blame the courts, but and I'm not even sure how they would overcome that. Right?
Yeah, no, I mean, I didn't even think about that because in thinking about early mid 80s, it's still so weighted towards, and I don't want to use the word patriarchy because it's an overplayed word, but the male side of things is believed more over the female or women's side. And I remember that. My parents went through a divorce in the early 80s, and I remember how that played out. He didn't want, it wasn't a battle like that, but it's still,
and what's interesting about that, and it's way off topic, but I'll just say this, is that there's been a swing the other way. Right, is that I know a lot of gentlemen who basically are cut out of their kids' lives completely now because now the courts look at it as the mother.
Well, and that's kind of a societal thing where we take these swings. This pendulum goes from, we'll overcorrect and that's how we'll fix it. Well, we all know that that's bullshit. You can't overcorrect and fix it. Somehow you go to equilibrium, not to the other side.
Right. Swinging it the other way doesn't make it fair. It just made it unfair the other direction.
The other direction. Yeah. And there's going to be a compass change and we'll swing back. And you're right. We could do a whole nother show on that.
Right.
All right. So around 13, your brother and your sister come back. They start to reintegrate or start to integrate into what is your house. And as you say, that's not easy. So how do you start to find your way? How do they start to find their way?
Honestly, I don't think we find our way until we're all adults. And even there, I think there's still some struggles for all three of us when it comes to finding our way with each other. We are three very different people. Just general views on life. I think for me, and this is skipping ahead, right? And I mentioned it earlier, is I moved out at 16. I thought I knew everything there was to know in life, so I didn't need to be here anymore, and I'm getting out.
Most 16-year-olds do, by the way.
Yeah, I've had 4 of them now, and I think only one of them didn't think they knew everything at 16. But, and they say that, your kids are going to be tenfold what you were, and I won't say tenfold, but they definitely, a couple of them followed in their dad's footsteps a little too close.
Gave you a little run for your money, huh?
They did, man. They did. Payback.
All right. So you mentioned it. You move out at 16. What led to that? Well, like you said, you knew everything. You were done. You were ready to go. So how do you progress to that point of going, all right, 16, I'm emancipate myself and I'm done.
So, and this goes back to, I think this develops as a part of that being there by myself with my mother. I'm the man of the house, right? Like I'm running the show. And no matter who she dated, and she dated a few people, it was, I'm in charge. I know what's best for me and my mother, even though I'm only 12, 10 or 10, well, I guess 10 and 11, and then they come back around 12, right? I know what's best. I'm running this show. I'm the parent. I'm the dad. I'm the husband, the father. I'm everything. And in walks this guy who, now I'm not the everything, right? Like I'm not the father figure anymore. I'm not. And again, I give him full credit for what he tried to do with us. We just never saw eye to eye. And there were a couple of instances after I hit high school where I wanted to do something and he wouldn't let me, or just the typical teenage rebellion. I can't be here under your rule, right? And so one day I quote unquote ran away. I didn't go far, but I ran away, and that led to a few conversations, and then I'll never forget, we were at my uncle's house, and I basically broke down. I didn't want to talk to anybody. I didn't want to do anything. I just wanted to see my best friend from high school. I just wanted to see him. Like, I want to talk to him. I don't want to talk to you. You're adults. You don't understand. I want to talk to this guy, right? Like, he's my best friend. I talk to him about everything. And I'll never forget, my mom looked at me at one point and goes, "Are you gay?" And I'm like, what? Where did that come from? Like, just because I wanted to talk to this guy, I didn't want to talk to them, right? And I was like, no. So we went back and forth for a while, and eventually they took me up to Potomac Hospital, and they said they had me evaluated for mental health issues. I'll never forget the interview. As I'm sitting there with this person, and she's asking me all these questions, and she's like, "Who's the president of the United States?" And I said, "George Bush." And she said, "No." I'm like, "Yes, it is." She said, "No, it's not. It's Ronald Reagan." I said, "Today's inauguration day. It's George Bush." And she looked at me and all cross-eyed. Next thing you know, I was locked up. So yeah, I spent a few weeks in the mental health unit at Potomac Hospital, and I had earned privileges to be able to sign myself out to the lobby. And one night I signed myself out to the lobby and just kept going. The one thing that I had at that time that I truly enjoyed and loved to do was go to school. You don't hear that out of many teenagers.
No.
Right. Many kids, period. But I loved going to school, and I especially loved English.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, I loved to write. So I went to school. I walked out of the hospital the next day. I went to school, and I showed up in my English class, and my English teacher knew I probably wasn't supposed to be there.
Right.
And I started asking a couple questions, and next thing I know, I was in an office, and I was being led out the door in handcuffs because I had left against medical advice and without my parents' permission, because I was still under their care.
Yeah.
And so they sent me up to Falls Church. I don't even remember the name of the hospital up there, but they basically did a 72-hour hold. And
right.
I wound up there for 72 hours, and I got out, and I said, "You know what? This isn't working. Like, you obviously don't understand where I'm at, and it's not a mental health issue. It's a relationship issue."
Yeah.
And so I made the decision. I'm out.
That's this great vision, though, of you walking into an English class with, let's say, a hospital gown, and it's open in the back, and you've got your fucking admission wristband, and you're just like, "Yeah, I'm here. Let's study some Edgar Allan Poe. I don't know,
Robert Frost. But
yeah." So no, I know that wasn't the vision, but that's what immediately flashed in my brain.
Yeah, I was definitely wearing clothes, just for the record.
So, all right. So 16, you say, "That's it. I'm done. I'm out of here."
Yeah.
Where do you go?
I wind up moving in with another patient that I'd met at Potomac Hospital.
It's probably stable.
Yeah. Real stable.
Yeah.
My good friends know this. The ones that are really close to me, they know that she was 34. I have already told you how old I was.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that relationship was more than just, I had a bedroom in the townhouse. I had a bedroom that I shared in the townhouse.
Right.
Anyway, so yeah, I went there, and I started working. I'd worked before that anyway. I'd worked, I guess, since I was 14. I started working around they had various jobs, marina, and
yeah, you've had, to say various jobs is an understatement.
Yeah, we can certainly get a job history here and anytime, but so yeah, I don't even remember what I was doing at the time for work, but I worked every day, and then the next year, so I dropped out. The next year, I said, I want to go back to school. Like I said, I liked school. I enjoyed learning. And so I went back and I attempted my junior year again. And the unfortunate part of being out on your own and trying to go to school full time is that part-time work just didn't cover the bills.
No, you still have to eat.
Yeah. So the decision was made that I dropped out permanently at that point, and I went to work doing another host of jobs. And one of the things about jobs that I'll just say up front is that prior to the fire service, I never held a job longer than a year. It wasn't because I got fired. I never got fired. I did get laid off from one because they closed down operations, but I would learn what there was to learn. And if they weren't teaching me anything new, I got bored and I moved on. And I think that's why I lasted so long with the department that I work for, right? Is because there was a point where every 3 years, whether you wanted to or not, you were being transferred. So it was always something new.
Right.
So it lasted for me.
That makes sense. And quite often it was less than 3 years, in many
Sometimes
cases.
it was, yeah. Sometimes it was. It just depended on what was happening at the time, right?
So speaking of the fire department, how do you find your way to the volunteer service?
So when we first moved in, my neighbor was a firefighter at Fort Myer.
And I was going to ask you, let's circle back real quick.
Mm-hmm.
What year did you move to Virginia?
It was my freshman year. So
okay.
I finished when we were in Texas. My parents, my brother and sister all moved up here, and I stayed to finish out my 8th grade year in Texas, and then came and joined them here.
Is Texas where you were with your stepfather and abuse took place, or did you go to Texas after that?
Oh, wow. That was, Texas was well after that. So all of that happened in Maine. About the time that my brother and sister came back to live with us, we actually moved to New Hampshire.
Okay.
We lived in Rochester and then in Manchester. So it was about a 2-year period there. And then we went out to Texas.
Now I got you. Now I've caught up on the timeline.
Yeah. So we went out to Texas. We were in El Paso because Fort Bliss is there. And
I did basic training at Fort Bliss.
Is that right?
It was miserable.
Yeah.
It was fucking miserable.
An airport that takes off toward a mountain. It's fantastic.
Yeah. I was 18 years old, 3.5 weeks out of high school, and Fort Bliss was miserable. It was July.
Yeah.
No.
Well, that's the thing El Paso raves about, right? Like they haven't had a day of rain in however many years, right? And the whole thing about it is it's not that it didn't rain. It's just that it rained for 10 minutes.
And it evaporates.
And it rained so much that the water just stood on the ground because it had nowhere to go. And then all of a sudden the ground would just suck it up and it'd be gone. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So we didn't get rain.
No, no, thank you. Don't need to go back to El Paso. So you make it to Virginia, and now you're basically, you're on your own. 16 is it. It's up to you.
I'm doing it, man.
So you find your way to the volunteer side of the fire department.
I did. So we were on that story. My neighbor was a firefighter. He kept trying to encourage me to get into the fire service. He's like, go volunteer and then, start applying. You love the fire service. And to this day, George and I still talk, and I remind him all the time that he probably kind of helped save me, between that 14 to, I'm 52 now period, right? Like he helped guide me in a way. And, I tell him all the time, I'm like, dude, you're like that father figure who helped guide me in times when, I guess I was down or I was misguided. Right. So yeah, I wind up working for this roofing company, and I'm doing roofing, living in apartments in Dale City. And I'm like, you know what? Let me go up here and fill out an application. I'm going to try this. So that's how I wound up there. I had extra time on my hands, and I figured, let's see what it's like.
Yeah, but you showed up late the first time.
I did. For reminding me. Thank you for reminding me. Shout out to Pat Peter. Pat Peters was a volunteer there, and Dale City would put all their new recruits through. It was like 8 to 10 classes or something like that. And it was just familiarization with stuff like SCBA and gear and rope and things like that. And really what it was they didn't want you getting on the rig without any type of training.
Right.
So then once you completed those classes, you could start to ride, and then you'd go to Firefighter 1, and you couldn't do anything until obviously you were certified as a firefighter. But the very first class, I showed up, I had worked the day before, and I was tired because it was roofing in summer, so you get wore out a little bit. And I showed up 10 minutes late to the class. I walked into the classroom and she looked at me and said, no, and pointed to the door. And out the door I went. And I went back later that day and I apologized to her. I said, listen, I'm sorry. I won't ever do that to you again. She goes, listen, this is a responsibility. You're taking on a responsibility if you can't be on, and people are relying on you. Not just the people out there, but the people who are here are relying on you to be here. And so if you can't be here on time, then this isn't for you. And I was never late again. In fact, it's probably one of the ways I get my my motivation now is that I worked yesterday, but I was at the station at 4:30 in the morning. We don't start till 6.
Yeah.
But the kids, the twins will tell you all the time, right? They learn this in band is that, what is it? On time is late and early is on time.
Right.
Right. So yeah, that's probably one of the major motivators for why I am usually early to things.
It happens to a lot of us, whether it's between the military, the fire department, whatever it is, it happens to a lot of us. And then you get worked up when you think you're going to be not early enough, not on time enough, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel that some mornings is, I try to leave here by 4:30 every morning.
Yeah.
So when I'm at the firehouse at 4:30, I've something in my internal clock is really screwed up because I'm already on the road, but I try to leave here by 4:30 in the morning. If I leave here at 4:32, I have a panic. Like I'm going to be late.
Yeah. I got caught up this morning. I looked at the clock. I was like, oh shit, I'm going to be late. And I was like, I give him a text. I was like, no, I'm going to be 3 minutes late. I don't need to text on 3 minutes late. I'm not in the fire department.
That's right.
So
that's right.
So you go through these classes with the volunteer department and they clear you to ride on the rig, but you're not fighting fire once you get on the rigs right away.
Yeah, no, not right away.
But you experienced a hell of a fire for your first experience.
I did. So Elm Farm Mobile Home Park, which I'm pretty sure one of your previous guests has talked about already, was the very first fire that I had ever been to as a firefighter or as a member of a fire department there. I wasn't a firefighter yet. So as a member of a fire department, Elm Farm Mobile Home Park, it was a trailer that was fully involved. And to this day is probably the biggest fire I'd ever seen. Meaning the flames were hitting the top of the 60 to 80 foot trees. It was huge. The circumstances, they wound up being a triple fatality, and the circumstances is that mom and dad got out, the kids didn't, mom went back in. They say that a mother will walk through fire for their children, and this woman certainly tried. And while I don't know that it really had, I know it didn't have the impact on me that it had on some of the guys who actually were firefighters who were actually battling the blaze, right? Like I was kind of just standing there running things back and forth for people. But I do remember during the overhaul process, we were pulling the walls apart and everything else, and a set of dentures comes rolling out. And as green as I am to all of this, I have no idea, right? I just look at it as a set of teeth just rolled out of the wall.
Yeah.
And you're like, what do we do now?
Right.
Right. Of course, everybody's looking around and going, you're an idiot.
Yeah, that fire. I guess for listeners who don't know what we're talking about, that fire is a little more explained with Brian Battenfeld's episodes, because that was a pivotal fire in his history of the fire service, because he was one of those guys down there doing that, and he got a little too up close and personal with the victims of that fire. So, but for you to be there on scene as what, 16, it's almost 17, right?
Age-wise?
Yeah.
Oh no. By that point I was, I was older. So I had to have been 20.
Okay. So
I was about 20.
You were up there.
Yeah.
Anyway. I was
getting there. Anyway.
But so, I mean, that's still an impressionable age, and the shit that happened on that fire is memorable, to say the least.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that hit me the hardest about that wasn't necessarily the fire itself. It was the reaction from the other people and watching what they were going through and seeing, and just listening to their stories about, how close they were or what they thought they could have done differently,
right,
or all those other things. And I got to tell you, looking back on that and the amount of fire that was just there when we showed up, and I was on the first in engine. So it wasn't like anybody was there before us. So these are the guys that are saying, I could have done this, I should have done that. And it's like, there's no way, right? Even not knowing at that time, looking back on it now, I can tell you that there's just the amount of fire that was there, the pure amount of fire that was there. There was no hope for that. Right?
Not only that, but I think we all know if you've experienced a trailer fire versus a house fire,
chimney on the side,
they burn so hot.
Yeah.
So fucking hot.
Yeah. And it's nothing more than a chimney on the side. I mean, it's got paper thin walls,
yep,
separating each room, and it literally just winds up being a furnace. So
how do you progress to your career job? How do you get to that spot? How do you just say, this is it. I found my calling. This is what I want to do.
Yeah. So for that, you have to back way up.
Okay.
We'll go all the way back to kindergarten.
Okay.
Is that I have a book in the other room, and I can bring it out and show you after the show, right? It's called School Years. And in it, there's a page for each year of school, and you can put your class picture on there and a little envelope to stick your report card in and all that stuff. And there's a little section in there that says, what do you want to be when you grow up, right? What do you want to do when you get older? And kindergarten, firefighter, right? Second year, I had a brain lapse. I want to be a cop. Third year, I went back to being a firefighter, just so we're clear. Right?
Dropped on your head at one point. You recovered.
Right. Yeah. I did. So honestly, being a firefighter is something I wanted to do as even a kid. Now, I have this conversation with some of the kids coming in now, or even some of the older guys, like, why aren't we getting that group of people? How come it's not such an honor to be a firefighter anymore? How come people just aren't motivated to do this? And I'm like, I grew up in an age when there were tot stickers. You had stickers on the window that showed this firefighter holding a kid.
Right.
People were heroes. And we don't have those anymore because people wouldn't take them off the windows when they moved out. So it wound up not being a kid in the room. Yeah. So like I said, we moved here, and George kept trying to encourage me to join, to get on with the fire service, do something with the fire department. I'm telling you, you're going to love it. I started volunteering, and he was right. I absolutely loved it. So I started applying. I applied for just about every jurisdiction in Virginia. Prince William, I went and tested for them, and I got fortunate because of the time I spent volunteering, I had been exposed to some of the career guys who would come in, or we talked to them. And one day I was sitting at a desk talking to the captain at the station, and we were having this conversation. And then the equivalent of a battalion chief, I can't remember what rank they called them then, majors or whatever the rank was. This guy walks in, a guy named Russ Rakestraw walks in, and he's like, why haven't you applied for the fire department? I said, I did. He said, what happened? I said, I took the test. I haven't heard anything else. He said, oh, okay. And then he walked away, and I went back talking to the captain. A few minutes later, Russ looks at me, he goes, hey, phone's for you. Phone didn't even ring. He had called personnel, and he said, I guess he put in a good word for me. And the captain of personnel at the time said, you'll be getting a letter in a couple of days. And so that's how I wound up getting hired. What's interesting is while I was in recruit school, I had another department call the academy and leave a message for me while I was there because they wanted to hire me. And I'm like, no. I said, I'm going to go with the first one, right? And how dare you call me at the academy of all places?
That's ballsy.
At the academy.
Right.
Because now if they find out, they're going to run me into the ground.
Right.
And then in my first year, I'm standing I'm assigned to 12, and phone rings one day. They're like, Tucker phone, pick it up. It's a chief from another department. And he's like, hey, I want to offer you a job. And I said, can I call you tonight when I'm not standing in the hallway of my current employer?
Right.
And he's like, oh yeah, absolutely. Like, you called me at work.
Right.
Now, in fairness to both of those entities, right, is that cell phones weren't a thing then.
Right.
It was landlines. So you were in one of two places. You were either at home or at work. And well, if they're at work, you're probably at work.
Exactly.
Because you're at day work, right?
Right.
So that was really the only place I think they thought they could get a hold of me. So that's where they called. But yeah, balls.
So you get hired in what year as a career firefighter?
September 3rd, 1996.
Okay. And
Back in the 1900s.
Yeah, way back in the 1900s. You graduate in 1997 in January, and you come out, and like you see, you're assigned to an engine right out of recruit school.
Engine 12.
How's that progress for you? What do you find?
Thanks for listening to another episode of The Things We All Carry. Head over to the website, thethingsweallcarry.com, for show notes, resources, and to sign up for the newsletter. Until next week, take care of yourselves and remember to check in on each other.